For the one that don't know me yet, I'm Sara Roversi. I'm the founder of the Future Food Institute, and I'm so glad to kick off this session of the Food and Climate Shapers Bootcamp organized by our institute and FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And today it's one of those days in which I'm very happy, and I just look forward to listen the conversation, because we have two very special guests, two organizations that are, say, part of the family, and two persons that are very close to us, because they have been always supporting the journey of our Future Food Institute, our climate shapers, our food shapers, and being part of the mission, because we're sharing the same purpose, we're sharing the same vision, and we all are focused on trying to make the impact that is needed and drive the transition in the food system that is needed now. I'm talking about Mark Brand. He is a great supporter of our programs, and he always has been one of the great source of inspiration for our fellows. He's an entrepreneur, he's a social entrepreneur, he's a great source of inspiration for us, but he's also a role model. And he is a chef. He's an entrepreneur, he's a chef, he's also a person that is always motivated to make a tangible impact, not only talking, but really running projects in the middle of the community, facing the challenges that you can find in every big cities, and trying to fill this gap and to become closer to the ones in need. And then we have Sophie Egan, another great friend of our family, because she is here together with the Food for Climate League. The Food for Climate League is a non-profit organization that we as Future Food, we are so proud. We have been part of this incredible project since day one. And with the Food for Climate League, we're talking about food, but overall, we are trying to help the industry and institution to rewrite the narrative around the topics related to food and climate, and overall to help consumers to start to eat more consciously and take conscious decisions when we are around the table. Today, we're going to talk about justice. We're going to talk about social justice. We're going to talk about food justice. And I really would love to debate with Mark and with Sophie and hear your voice and let's say also get your critical question and start a conversation here. So let's start with Sophie, because she's a lady, and I think we should start with Sophie. And let's start to design the big perspective. And let's talk about food justice, climate justice, social justice, and all of those nexus.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Sara, for including me here today. It's wonderful to be joining each of you, and I'm so inspired at how many different countries you all represent. It's really a pleasure. Just getting my slides to cooperate here. So I am Sophie Egan. I wear many hats, but I'm an author, most recently of How to Be a Conscious Eater. I am the founder of a consulting practice called Full Table Solutions that's accelerating solutions at the intersection of food, health, and climate. And I am incredibly honored to support the Food for Climate League as Director of Strategy. And so what that means is that I oversee all of our strategic partnerships, and that includes working closely with Future Food Institute, as was mentioned. So I will go ahead and share my screen here. The full screen is not cooperating. I apologize.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, yeah, so we'll just go this way. But in any case, I'm delighted to introduce you to the Food for Climate League, which is a nonprofit research collaborative that seeks to democratize sustainable eating. And I think that's maybe why we came to mind for this session in particular, that's around climate justice and food justice, and really this idea that every person has a role to play as a climate hero through food choices. And our goal is really to allow humanity to tackle the climate crisis bite by bite, by getting the messaging right, by getting the storytelling right. So for us, this means reframing what climate smart eating is, making it easy and alluring to partake in, and making these habits relevant to all people. We at the Food for Climate League have an extraordinary team. Yves Turopal, our founder and executive director, our board of directors, which includes Sara Roversi, as well as Lisa Feldman from Sodexo, as well as Dorothy Shaver from Unilever. Also from FFI, we have the amazing Chiara Cecchini, as well as Chavi Japwani, who help us with really their leadership around innovation and human-centered design. We have a phenomenal new grant and brand development lead named Alejandra Marquez, a veteran communications guru named Amy Cull leading our communications efforts. And then, as I mentioned, I'm really overseeing the partnerships work. The setting that we operate in, the perspective, the big idea that Sara mentioned that we bring to this is that we have this interesting bridge, to a gap that we can bridge. What I mean by that is we have people very concerned about the climate crisis, completely obsessed with food, and not necessarily connecting the dots between those two. And yet, food is actually one of the clearest avenues to make an impact on both human and environmental health. By and large, when you look at the private sector, there are tons of great efforts, new product developments, new menu offerings, consumer engagement campaigns around climate smart food that by and large don't gain the traction they could be. They have historically been remaining primarily niche instead of the norm. So to kind of unpack this slide a bit, people concerned about the climate crisis, I would think that this group above all has probably seen some data on this, but just a few interesting stats: 350% increase in searches for what can I do about climate change globally last year. 1 in 5 American millennials believe that global warming will lead to the extinction of humanity within their lifetimes. This is profound. Talk about existential crises, right? And this relates to the mental health issues that are wrapped up in addressing climate, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And then this even has affected things like birth rates, with many millennial parents saying they're worried about the impact of climate change on their children's quality of life. And it's made many millennial parents even forego having families or postpone. And really, there is a zeitgeist, if you will, at now in particular, that's been growing for years around linking climate issues with food justice and human health, saying we cannot look at these topics in separate domains. You can't talk about climate without thinking about health. You can't talk about racial justice without talking about food justice, without talking about climate justice. These are all so deeply interrelated. And just as an example, Google searches for Black Lives Matter connected to climate are at now an all-time high. And on the right here, you see just a sample of some of the hashtags that really kind of capture this zeitgeist I'm speaking about. But it's reflective too of a broader sort of tension between aspiration and action, where people by and large feel overwhelmed. They feel not a whole lot of trust in big institutions, big food, big government. They don't see how to make a difference. There's a feeling of helplessness, of powerlessness, disempowerment even, especially when you face these kinds of apocalyptic headlines like the extinction of humanity. I mean, how do you fall asleep at night when you're really wrestling with these topics? And then the other big piece that is baked into our goal around democratizing sustainable eating is that huge swaths of the population simply feel unseen. They feel ignored, they feel even perhaps exploited, or there's been a lot of conversation around the notion of extractive relationships, particularly with communities of color. And in total, what you have is primarily narratives that have been speaking to the few and not the many, and they've been primarily speaking to white audiences, Western audiences, and more well-off, more wealthy audiences. So the opportunity, though, at our doorsteps, at our fork tips, if you will, is that people are obsessed with food, especially younger generations who are the future, right? Millennials and Gen Z, those under 40, still even spend a disproportionate amount of their time, money, and energy in all things food. And so if we can link these two, if we can use food as that tool for feeling seen, feeling empowered, feeling that you are making a difference, and also that in the flip side, that climate-friendly foods are actually nourishing you and meeting your emotional needs, this is where we can start to see some movement, we feel. I love this quote from the Eat Lancet report. I would guess this has been a topic in this cohort. Eat Lancet report, this groundbreaking report that for the first time laid out kind of what does the optimal diet that unites nutrition and within planetary boundaries, what does that look like? And this quote is, food is the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth. Period, full stop. Wow, like if that doesn't get you really excited, I see some snapping from Mark, thank you. That's huge, right? It's huge. So we have this amazing opportunity. We can really drive demand for climate beneficial foods so that the marketplace, the set of choices available to us is climate friendly by default, where that is the norm. That's just what food is. That's the future we envision. And it's also making what's good for us and good for the planet also good for the bottom line, so that those in the position to make these changes through supply chains, through menu innovation, through product development, are incentivized to do so because that market pull is there. Our approach is distinct in a number of ways. I won't go through all of them, but in essence, we're really, we really look at basic human needs. I would say the aha of Food for Climate League is that it is positioning climate smart eating as something that can reach people where they're at by whether it's concerned about their own health, looking to use food to build belonging and a sense of belonging and community, and those who are those more purpose-driven environmental activists already kind of engaged in climate issues, but maybe not so much yet on a food perspective. And our goal is to really avoid some of these kind of common emotions that can be triggered by climate communications and bring everyone into the tent of climate smart eating. So this approach is rooted in behavioral science and psychology research that some of you maybe seen in the past. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? These are the fundamental human needs, what we all seek, whether we say it or know that we seek these things. Time and again, these are the patterns. And if you look at kind of the three buckets, basically they fall into the three coexisting desires for control, community, and purpose. Now, at any given time, you may be moving in or out of one of these need states. Could be minute by minute, hour by hour, or different phases of your life, different, depending on the household composition, or there might be elements of this that are more pronounced for entire, years or decades of your life. But at the core, we all share these central kind of fundamental human needs. And so the old approach speaks, what our researchers found is that by and large, narratives around climate smart food in the whole bucket of only speaking to the few, a big part of it is just speaking to that purpose need. It's saying this is the right thing to do. You need to give something up in order to do the planet a favor here, and that means giving up your meat. It means trading in your car. It's not just limited to climate smart food. It's really sustainability oriented messaging at large. It has to do with altruism, right? And this sense that you'll just feel like a better person if you do these things. And that's great for some people, but really we have this opportunity to craft messages that speak to every essential human need and therefore expand relevancy and reach so that these approaches really are mainstream. We feel that businesses, as I've touched on, but also governments and nonprofits who are engaged in this work can really benefit from changing the way that we look at these types of narratives. And so what I mean in particular is that if you look at a lot of campaigns, a lot of engagement campaigns, in addition to some of the kind of lack of traction of products and menu options, many folks will tell you that their language isn't landing, they're not seeing the movement. Think of something like municipal composting campaign efforts or reusable bag programs or something. Some of these have had greater success than others, but by and large, we can really help our allies generate wider interest and engagement in this way. And another major element of our approach is that we really want to build on existing food trends, not create new food culture, but bend food culture in this direction, that it's really already heading, but just not yet at that grand scale. And then of course, individuals can benefit by feeling in control of their own well-being, feeling bonded to others, and yes, feeling purposeful, feeling like they're helping out, but all through food culture. We have a research trajectory that essentially these are the areas, these are the kind of elements of that food culture that we think are particularly ripe for building on, for kind of feeding this approach into existing product lines, pipelines, portfolios, existing trends. And when it really comes down to what are we talking about, like what is climate smart food, there is a large umbrella for us, a menu, if you will, of ways to eat climate smart. One of the biggest challenges we see is that it's usually just focused on meatless, right? Or plant-based. And that absolutely is an important dimension. But there are these other ways to be a climate smart eater that don't require that binary of you're in or you're out, you're full-blown vegan and therefore you're a climate smart eater, or you're not and therefore you're not. Everything from healthy soils, regenerative agriculture, biodiversity, promoting biodiversity through what we eat, wasting less food for sure. And then of course, just the whole picture of climate beneficial, lower emissions types of food choices. So we have written a report called How to Talk About Food and Climate that has 10 best practices for talking about food and climate. And it's based on expert interviews, a landscape analysis. And really, I think the key parts I think are relevant for all of you to think about are some mistaken assumptions that this research surfaced. One is that everyone will take action around climate if they're just educated about it. Consistently, we see that education is a piece of the puzzle, but it is not the full, that will not get us where we need to go. Information alone does not change behavior. The other key thing is that this mistaken assumption is that sustainable goods and practices only resonate with a small portion of the population. Again, we see actually there's a far greater number of people poised, eager to play a role in this and just not knowing how. And then third, there's this mistaken assumption that you have to talk about climate, mentioning, how sustainable your product or your menu is, to stoke climate beneficial behavior change. And we see actually that leading with flavor, leading with other attributes of the foods that happen to be better for the planet can also be effective. And then the other key area that we saw in this report is that there are some unique challenges that make it extra hard to link food and climate. So it's not as if this gap has not been bridged for good reason. This is really hard work. One of the challenges is that these are complex agricultural concepts. Distilling them down to a sticker on a package or a label, or even a soundbite, that's very, very hard. Then there are psychological triggers related uniquely to climate. Very interesting climate research, climate communications research around the psychology of climate change is fascinating. I don't know if that's part of this course, but it's really, really interesting. There's issues of guilt. Any one of us who exists on planet Earth occupies, we consume resources. We are part of the problem, and this can be really hard just by virtue of being alive. This can be hard to get over that kind of psychological barrier. So there's triggers of all kinds of, of psychological reactions. And then of course, food is so personal. Food is identity, food is culture, tradition, family, religion, heritage, and so much more. And so we're talking about changes that are really baked into your whole identity. So I want to be sure we have enough time for all that we have in store today, but I just want to let you know we have an amazing ecosystem where we're actually bringing this approach and this vision to life. Partners, sponsoring companies who are really, really groundbreaking and visionary in their thinking. And I want to just leave you with the perspective that we feel very strongly that the time is now. There has never been a better time to be connecting these dots between food and climate to generate the meaningful shifts in our food system that we know need to occur. There's a Washington Post piece that kind of captures this point of view. I can link to this in the chat as well. But essentially, the time is now to introduce these new narratives around sustainable eating. And the last dimension of why the time is now is really the crux of your session today, which is around social justice. So there is so much opportunity because of how many people have been left out. So instead, if we flip this on its head, imagining the possibilities of how might we empower communities of color to use climate smart eating to address physical and mental well-being? How might we celebrate the climate smart heritage foods and traditions of communities of color to facilitate a sense of community, pride, and identity, and so on and so on and so forth. So let's do this work. Let's create new narratives and food trends that will resonate with a wider population, catalyze greater impact, and for food companies generate revenue. We are just getting started, and I'll look forward to questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Thank you so much. And as I was saying, we needed to create the stage and set what's the framework we are facing. We all have access to tons of data, research. Probably we have been saying the wrong words and designing the wrong narrative until now. But I'm very fascinated to work a lot with you and with colleagues like you, really trying to grasp all the content to transform the narrative. But on the other hand, also to see how things are happening in the ground, in the cities, in the communities. And I wanted really to create this session because we have the knowledge, we have the brain, but we have also the action, and transform all of the things that we were saying in something that is making impact every single day. So I always have been very inspired by Mark because he is also professor of innovation. He's teaching innovation, but then he is the one that is getting his hand dirty every single day. Because when we talk about all the things that you were saying about food waste, about the drivers, that is deliciousness, is tasty food, and so on, we are talking about all the things that he is seeing and designing every single day. And so now, Mark, I really would love you to share with us what's the magic trick to make the magic happen and change the life of thousands or millions of people every single day.
Thank you. And Sophie, that was wonderful. I was just talking to Eve this morning, and we're sending her our love, obviously, for she's had a loss in the family. We were scheduled to connect tomorrow, but I'm looking forward to working with you guys closer. So thank you for setting the stage so beautifully. I feel like your HMWs, your how might we's were like a lob. Like,
Yes.
how might we do this work? I'm like, I have some answers.
Excellent.
I can be helpful here. So for those of you that I don't know, I've been cooking for 30 years. I've had the distinct opportunity of slinging pizza in New York and cooking at the Vatican and everywhere in between, to use the voice and the work that we do around food justice to change the narrative. So I think let's start with some metrics because it's really important. And 36% of the planet, I think it's more like 45, live in extreme poverty. That's under $1 a day US. So if you go to a party and you have actions in that party and other people can't have those actions, you impact them. So every choice that we make in the supermarket, every choice that we make online shopping, every choice that we make with our money impacts another 2 to 3 billion people who don't have those choices that we should care about because we're connected. We're all one interconnected thing. The food that we eat, we come from the same stuff. We're all literally made of stardust. Right? So it's not like woo-woo theory. It's real. We are this. And so if we don't concern ourselves with the rest of the world and we fall to the capitalist structures, and those structures are, there's about a dozen companies that own and operate all of our food and water. That should scare the hell out of us. It really should. And I've worked with most of them, and they're really good at talking, but they're not real great at working. And so we need to hold people's feet to the fire at this moment. My work encompasses 2 charities. I run a Better Life Foundation on this side of the border. I'm in Vancouver, BC, and I would be remiss not to also acknowledge that I'm on the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish, Snohomish, Musqueam people. This is their land, not ours. And that is the case for all of the Americas. The largest genocides on the planet did not happen in Europe. They happened right here. And so we have all of these things that impact our food systems, our heart systems, our soul, and we don't talk about them. And until we do, and until we start to make real movements towards reparations in these areas and justice, we can't do anything else. We're stuck. We're stuck in these places. So Better Life Foundation in Canada, in Vancouver, British Columbia, here, we feed over 1,000 people a day. And that number is like, oh, it's 1,000 people. Think about standing with 1,000 people right now. Think about standing with 10 people right now would be nice. But with 1,000 people, and when you can impact that many people every day and show them that you love them with scratch-made meals from people in their community. So we employ people with diverse abilities. And I made that word up. It means that they're diversely abled because I hate the word disability because it's false. 1 in 4 of us has mental illness. That would be considered a disability. It's a diverse ability. I suffer from 3 of them. Makes me a superhero. It makes me be able to do more things. People who are diversely abled, who are on the spectrum, can concentrate in different ways. They code 3 times as fast sometimes. So when we reframe the narrative about who is useful, who is valuable, we get a much better product. And I'll share with you in a business sense, because I think it's important to understand why this makes sense. In the service industry at large, and I've owned 13 different restaurants, there's about an 80% turnover per annum. Every single year, 80% of staff turnover. Makes sense, right? Actors, a lot of actors serving tables. People in school, people looking for better tips. They move around a lot. It costs every individual service business, of which there are hundreds of millions, between $7,000 and $10,000 US to train an employee. That's a lot of money for a 20 to 50 person business. What if you didn't have to? My turnover is less than 3% per annum, which gives me all that money back to do impact work and employs people who others deem are unemployable. It's just good business. It doesn't have to be about your heart. In my case, it is, but I also understand it's about money for a lot of people. So when Sophie was talking about how do we change the system, I have some ideas, and that's one of them. When you tell people you are just on per annum, your turnover rate will go down at least 50%, 50, because people want to work harder. They want to show up. They want to prove that they can make a difference. They want to be in service to people. So the second part of that is they want to be in service to people. Sophie's metric, 1 in 5 millennials, 1 in 4 is an argument or a case, thinks that they are going to die of a mass extinction. That's crazy. So if you think as a company you're not building for that, then what are you doing? Right? So we're in service to people. We're B corporations. And if you're unfamiliar for what a B Corp is, we were the first B Corp restaurant in Canada, first B Corp brewery and farm. I own and operate an 11-acre farm just up this way that you can't see. And that farm hires people with diverse abilities as well, with developmental delays who are incredible. Both of those companies service people and planet before profit, not in the greenwashing way, not in the CSR way, in the corporate mandate. If I don't adhere to those, my corporation is insolvent. It is in default. So we have to prove via metrics and math that we are more in service to people on the planet than we are to profit. Imagine if companies had to do that and didn't just run tear-jerking campaigns put on by PR companies. Imagine if you could just look and see the metric of what they were doing and they could be kept beholden. Now, I want to make a really clear statement here. I don't believe that the people who work in large companies are bad people at all. I believe that they don't think there's another way, and they haven't understood to change the machine. And when we are faced with crisis, we change the machine, and we're in one. So that's what the work that we do on the Canadian side. We also do tons and tons of events in what I call an advocate factory. So when we're forward facing, I own a diner, a community radio station, a commissary kitchen, all in one building. And I'm super easy to find. It's just mynameINC.com on the internet, and you can see all of our projects. And I'm always happy to help, so you can reach out. In that session, I use all of these normative behaviors, dinner events, community cooking to change the way people interact with those who are impoverished. So I hacked the system and said, people always said, Chef, can I cook with you? I really want to come cook with you and help the neighborhood. And I would say, do you know how to cook? And 9 times out of 10, people would say, I have no idea. And I would say, how is that helpful to me? So essentially, you want a free cooking lesson. You're going to come cut yourself, burn something. It's not helpful to me. What do you do? And they say, I'm a CSA or I'm an accountant. That's not helpful. I'm like, oh my God. Apparently, you've never met anybody who runs a nonprofit. That is very helpful. Or I'm a UX designer. Have you seen the socials or the websites for these corporations? Sorry, these nonprofits. We need your help. But they kept coming back over and over and over again. They keep coming back. And I said, okay, fine. You are going to donate $5,000 to $10,000 and bring a group of 10 to 12 people. And I will teach you to cook for 75 people. I'll teach you to batch cook, but you're going to pay me, my charity, enough for me to create 1,500 meals outside of this time. And thinking that nobody would do it, right? That they'd have to show up and cook for 75 people. I was like, no. And find that money. My inbox was flooded. We were doing 3 to 4 a week before we closed because of COVID. And it allowed us to generate more than 500,000 meals more a year. Now, that part's great. Financially, fantastic. People doing team building exercises, I didn't realize was such a hot topic for companies and for groups of people. They wanted to learn how to cook. So they're cutting onions, they're shaving down carrots, they're doing the thing. I added a layer. I said, when you're done cooking, you're going to scrub up. We're going to do staff meal together like you work in a kitchen. And then I'm going to have you put an apron on, light candles on the tables, print menus, turn on the music, get your greetings ready. And we're going to invite 75 predominantly Indigenous women and children fleeing violence into the diner. And you were going to serve them a fine dining meal. The only barrier is it's a dry event. Anything else they ask for, if it's in the house, you give it to them. That was the only training. And it was incredible. And continues to be so. I'll leave you with a small analogy on that one, and I'll quickly talk about our US work. We had a company come in that was a tech company, and the CEO did not want to do the event. So the head of HR told us the CEO didn't want to do the event, but he came anyway. And so he's on his BlackBerry, not cooking, not really doing anything. And then as it got to service, I was like, hey, let's go. We need your hands. Let's get some food to the table. And he was shocked. He put it away and he started serving tables. At the end of it, my partner, Ash, and managing director, sees him and he looks messed up. He looks very distraught. So he says, I'm going to talk to him. I'm like, yeah, go. So he goes to talk to him and he says, is everything okay? I know that this can be very confronting when you see people who are living in the margins and you feel that energy for the first time. And he cuts him off. He's like, it's not that. I just served one of my employees. His employee didn't make enough to be food secure and had to rely on the kindness of food banks and programs like ours to eat. Obviously, he was intrinsically changed. His circles of influence are changed. This is how you make change. You engage people, you change their hearts and their minds about what is real. Because we can tell you stats all day long, but until you touch it and feel it, you are not going to react. And unless you've touched the bottom, you don't really know unless you can feel it from somebody else. In the US, we work in Brownsville, the Bronx, Harlem, all the boroughs of New York. We work in Oakland, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Again, predominantly with Black, Brown, and Indigenous kids and their families. During COVID, we can't travel. We're locked down. What are we going to do? How are we going to be in service to our community? Innovation is incredibly important, and the tools that we need to connect with people already exist. We're here right now. Last year, if you'd asked me to do this, I would have put in a firm no. Be like, I don't talk on computers. I only talk in person. Now I talk on computers all day long and love it. Like, I can feel you. We're here. But it takes these moments. So I'm getting my groceries delivered because I'm immune compromised. I can't see anybody, so I'm going crazy. I'm used to being on the road 310 to 320 days of the year. I'm losing my mind. And I realized that kids, because of my research around homelessness, all have phones. Everybody has a smartphone. Everybody has an iPad or a laptop. They just do. They just have them. So I reach out to my partners and say, I want to create this thing. It's going to be called Sharpen Up. It's going to be a virtual cooking class. I'm going to send people groceries based on their wants, their needs, their ethnic likes, their allergies, sensitivities, things they don't eat. And we're going to drop groceries on their doorstep. And then we're going to meet like this. And we're going to teach them everything about food. And they were like, you're crazy, but we trust you. Let's do it. So we did our first cohort of 15 kids. I cried during the first session, and I'm not easily brought to tears. I was just so happy to still be able to do work. So the second class built onto it was a one-on-one session. You choose the recipe, we'll teach you, send you the groceries. Third session is a celebration. You cook, you show us. I bring in a musical guest. We all celebrate each other. Kids are 7 and 8 years old, roasting whole fish. They're breaking back wings on chickens. They're realizing that the money they spent and their families spent or could spend on a meal for 5, 6, 7 people was less than McDonald's. Their heads are blown away. They're like, why don't they teach us in school? A common theme. Kids ask, why don't they teach us in school? I'm like, I can't tell you that. But I'm teaching you now, so you got to teach somebody else. That's your duty. We've done 8 of these cohorts. We're now up to 30 kids in each of them with 100 people joining because the families were like this the whole time. I was like, you can just join. There's no reason for you not to be there, but we're centering your child. Your child is doing it. The love and respect and interaction between them is about the food. We all inherently know this stuff. It's in us. Cooking is easy. Food is easy. It's meant to be easy. It's how we survive. We've overcomplicated it. We eat things that are not real. The synthetics and the shit that we put in our bodies by corporate design is literally killing all of us and the planet. It's that simple. If you change the way you consume and change the way you influence people in your circles as your responsibility, and I've traveled most of the world, there's fresh food almost everywhere. Bodegas in Harlem, side of the road in Polacca, Italy. There's fresh food everywhere. You just have to make those choices. And if we make them together, farmers can afford their land again. Things will change. But the system is rigged. So we have to be adamant in the way that we work. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. We love the digital applause, but also the physical one. We want to hear them sometimes. I love them. So thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Mark. And of course, I invite you all to type your question, to raise your hand, and to jump in the conversation. But let's say here in the audience, we have our fellows, the participants of this bootcamp. And I had the chance to meet many of them in the previous day in our mentoring session and so on. Here we have entrepreneurs, we have professionals, we have people working in different fields within the industry. We all have seen how much they are motivated really to do something and to change the industry they're working in or their communities. And I would love to hear from you both. Which are your suggestions? Because here we are all stuck in a situation everywhere in the world. Probably we are all feeling the same things. We really want to change the system. We want to help the industries, the farmers close to our house, the chefs, our community, to make the shift that is needed. We are all hearing Build Back Better, or all the claims that are pushing the broader community to think in a different way, to change our mindset and really to act in a different way. Which are the suggestions you would love to give to people that want to make an impact? Are at the beginning of their career, or they're running a project, they want to be impactful. Of course, they are inspired to all the things that we are reading and the inspiring professors that are sharing data and knowledge related to climate smart cities, building resilient communities and so on. But where to start, how to start? So both Sophie and Mark, you're working with big industries as well. And of course, Mark, you are doing it every single day as well. So, Sophie, I want to start from you.
Sure. So I think one of the kind of pieces of advice that I've always really loved is the notion of leading from where you are. So wherever you are a leader, or you have the potential to be a leader. Let's start with your household. If you are a household of one, the choices that you make, and Mark really emphasized this, I speak about this a lot in my work as an author, they do matter. They add up throughout your lifetime. They matter because of social norms, what you do, what you tell your friends, your family, what you post about on social media. It all adds up. It especially adds up in two cases. One, the things you eat and consume more regularly. So the more routinized habits, your daily coffee routine, your weekday lunch, looking at what small changes you can start to make, get some positive feedback loops, just in your own sphere of influence, what you can control in your daily life will start to show you also where the barriers are. In making that change, did it cost you 3 times as much to go to a more sustainable lunch option from your cold cut sandwich? That's a problem. That's maybe a problem that you might want to solve in a larger context outside your household influence, outside your daily impacts. All of these can provide powerful insights about, again, not only the barriers to this vision that Mark and I have spoken about, but also potential business opportunities, potential policy opportunities. What are the levers for transformation that you can identify? The other area where, so the things you do most often, again, that matters far more than, for example, what you eat on vacation or what you eat on your birthday, right? Those are the special occasion items. The other is if you are a parent. If you have children, you're making decisions on their behalf, right? And so your decisions have a multiplier effect. You're also helping to influence the next generation. You are shaping their food identities, the values that they're going to embody, how you as now a generational transfer of voting with your fork, voting with both your vote, hopefully you have to vote with your vote. I'll talk more about policy, but absolutely voting with your grocery basket, your fork, and so forth. This is just the beginning. Then when you look outside of that in your own immediate community, I think Mark probably has a lot more specific ideas based on the things he's already done. But looking at, again, like let's say sticking with the kids example, taking a look at your children's school food. Raising your voice is the theme. So it is helpful to get the concrete insights on that smaller scale, so you know what to ask for, what to push for, what to advocate for on these larger stages, so to speak. So in your office, the food that is served perhaps wherever you are employed, if you go back to the office at some point. But absolutely school food is a big one. Maybe your child is in a university, it's not in your immediate, or not just children, but your friends, your family, and so forth. Look for these institutional purchasers who can make dramatic changes at scale because of the size of their purchasing volume. And then let's talk about policy. Speaking about the changes you wish to see to your local officials. If you've got some time on your hands, now is a great time for letter writing. Writing also to not only your local officials, run for office by all means, advocate for these policies yourself in your own community, which you know best, right? And then also on a national stage. I, for example, have been thinking a lot about, I'm in the US, I'm in Colorado. Every day there's a new appointee in the new Biden administration, lots of momentum around climate, great. Where's the food climate person? Where is food in the Biden climate agenda? I don't see it. And I am, we're talking with others to raise our voices around that issue. So those are just some examples, but it's really about, I would say, these kind of concentric circles and spheres of influence. Whatever you can bite off will make a difference. And it's really, I think, just trying to see, trying to bring to light, shine a giant microscope, giant spotlight on, again, what those levers are, and then begin to apply the pressure that you think is needed. We need, for these transformations to occur, it has to be both push and pull, and that's both consumer demand and policy advocacy and the pull from the private sector perspective of offering better options in the first place, companies, and government taking the lead in more bold, ambitious, exponential. We don't have time left for incremental change. It must be exponential change.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And from that, I want to jump to Mark, both asking the same question, but also adding another topic. We've been debating a lot about that. How to deal with obesity and food desert, that I know it's a word that you don't like. And thank you so much, Colin, for raising this question.
Yeah. Let's start with the question, and then I'll circle back, because Sophie, hit pretty much all of the nails on the head. So I'm going to take it super personal instead of like what development work you can do on yourself to figure stuff out. So obesity is not created by sloth. It's not created by lazy people. It's created by poverty. It's created by manufactured foods. We are addicted to sugar, refined sugars, and saturated fats. And they keep us addicted. That's the game. It's literally, if you pick up a package and it has 7 things that you can't pronounce on it, throw it away and try and encourage everybody else to do the same. Education systems being disgustingly backwards. If you don't know, how could you possibly? I believe there was 4 food groups growing up. Things that came out of a box, things that came out of a can, things that came out of a delivery bag, and things that my friends' moms cooked. I didn't know any different. I'm a clever dude. I had no idea. So 2 billion people are living, almost 3, on less than $1 a day. They don't have that choice. Here's what we're giving you. I sit on the New York City Food Policy Council for the food bank. I hate food banks. And that's why I sit on the council. Like Sophie said, if you want something to change, sit with it, join it, create discourse, try and make changes. I don't believe that companies like Unilever and Sodexo and Monsanto and Cisco donating 700 tons of lima beans is helpful to anybody, aside from the waste management company that makes $100,000 off taking them to the landfill. These are not solutions. They're disgusting. So why people are dying of obesity is because health is also profitable in a lot of places in the world. In my country, I'm very blessed here in Canada. We take care of you. In a lot of countries, we just take care of you. But if there's profiteering to be made in privatization of medicine and hospitals, and diabetes predominantly affects the poor, well, who cares? There's people dying behind grocery stores every night because they can't afford insulin. There's outrageous things that happen. So the system that creates this food and then peddles it to us, it is a drug, creates that. And so I just don't want to mince words because I don't think we have time for it. And then as far as personal stuff, I think this is really important. Really, really important. So when you're trying to discover what it is that you can do in the world, which you're obviously trying to do right now, more education, how do I then put myself into a place in the world where I can make change? There is a Venn diagram. And for you unfamiliar with that terminology, it just means 3 circles. They cross over, and in the center point is you. So you are the center of this Venn diagram I'm about to describe, okay? The first thing is, what do you care about and why? The second part of that question is the most important part. Why do you care? I care about the climate. Why? Because it's going to maybe kill me. Yeah. So you're fearful for your life? Do you live in a regional area where it's close to water? Like, what are the things? Did you survive Katrina? What are the things that generally are the levers from within your own trauma and your own bias, which are totally fun to use? Why will you be motivated? I care about homelessness because I've been it. I care about it because it's in here. It's in here. It lives in me. I know what it feels like to not have an option. I know what it feels like to burn a bridge. I can feel it. So I work on that specifically because it's my fire. So I had to ask myself why. I was doing this work and people were like, why this? I'm like, because somebody has to do it. Because I hadn't addressed why I was actually doing it. Once I found out why, I was like, oh shit, that makes a lot of sense. That's why I'm so passionate about this. That passion you can hear. That is necessary. It's not optional. You have to. And if you care about rescuing kittens that passionately, please focus on that. There's a lot of kittens to be rescued. And, that's what you're going to show up in. The second question you're going to ask yourself is, what's a skill I wish I could use more? Not something somebody told you were good at, not a job you once had. They might coexist. Doesn't have to be. For me, I was running 11 businesses, 13 cost centers. I was a CEO, entrepreneur, social impact guy. I hadn't been in a kitchen working for 10 years. And I realized I did a couple pastry shifts here and there when people bailed out. Like I had to make stocks a couple times. I know how to do it, but I was the guy, right? I had the desk. I did the thing. We weren't this level. We were this. And then I realized how much I loved cooking again. And how it could be my instrument for change. I couldn't get anybody to listen to me in boardrooms. Nobody gave a shit. As soon as I started cooking, everybody wanted to come to the party. Everybody wanted to come hear the Roots play and like see me with this chef and that chef because they care. Fame matters to people. So I was like, I can tilt this lever. I have famous friends. Why wouldn't I use this? Because it's a skill I have and a network I have. So I know what I'm passionate about. I know what my tools are. Now, the critical question, how much time do I have? How much time do I have to do this? Realistically, how much time? I've got 2 hours a month is a completely acceptable answer because it's where you start. And I promise you, you're going to see all these things come together and then you're going to find an organization that you're going to give selflessly without need those 2 hours or 20 or 200 or wherever it is that you are at with this. And when you show up and volunteer, if you can tell me there's a better feeling in life outside of being a parent, then I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. There is no better feeling. We are hardwired to give and show up. And when we do, we walk away and we're like, oh my God, is that my ego? It's not. It's because you've done an act of service. You've been in service. And then you might change the way you think about life. I changed my entire life. I was like, I don't care about any of these businesses at all unless they can do something positive for the planet. And I blew up a $17 million revenue business because I knew what I had to do with my life. And I'd already been to the bottom. So I'm like, it can't get worse than that. At least I'll figure it out. So I made those informed decisions based on what I knew I cared about, what skill I was going to use. This one, cooking, convening, community. Those are my skills. And how much time was I going to dedicate? It started with once a month, I did a dinner. And then it turned into about 107 hours a week. But that took 6 years. So you will find where you're going to impact. And it's all your motivator. Because when it seems hopeless, which often it does, even when I listened to Sophie earlier, I was like, oh man, I know these numbers like the back of my hand, but they still hit me every time. You realize that's okay. I'm doing my thing. We're working towards this. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much. And then I want to pick another question, always from Colin, because both Sophie and Mark, you work with also big industries. And so I think it is interesting to see what we can do by dealing with those big powers, with this big food corporations, big agricultural giants, because of course we know how it's important to also help them shift, help them change. So what do you think is needed, and how do you think we can influence them, impact them, help them in some way?
Yeah, this is a big one. This is a really big question to grapple with. It reminds me of another piece of advice that came to me at the end of grad school, and I was trying to just figure out where to plug in, like what to do with my career. And there was a mentor of mine named Jaspal Sandhu in a really amazing design thinking for food class at UC Berkeley. And I was telling him I couldn't figure it out, and it was all these different possible sort of doors to go through, but none of them really seemed right. And he said, I said, I want to change the food system. He's like, everybody wants to change the food system. You want to change the food system? Go work at Walmart. And I was just like floored. I'm at UC Berkeley. Like, nobody wants to work at Walmart. It was a Berkeley kind of kid. You're like the most liberal bubble possible, right? But his point really struck a chord with me, which was change from within. And it's the idea that if you penetrate, then you can actually leverage that power for good, right? That scale. Now, I'm not so naive to think that that's all that's needed. I just share it because what I don't think has gotten us super far is only these kinds of advocates versus big food constructs. And that's why I'm in the work that I'm doing. Now, we need advocacy organizations. We need policy, all of those other dimensions. And please go into those areas and bring your talents and passion. Like, I love the way Mark said, whatever it really is that's your bias, or if you want to save kittens, and so forth, like, head in those directions. But there is truth also to what he said, that, people in big food companies are not bad people. They're business people. Fundamentally, they're business people. And so when you start to say, okay, this is about business, and then we want business to happen to be inherently good for us, good for the planet, centered around equity and all of the values-based goals that many of us have, that's when it becomes really interesting. So I actually, before coming to work with Food for Climate League, and we do work with Sodexo and Unilever, among others, right? I was in a role after that conversation that I shared. Actually, then went and worked for 5.5 years at the Culinary Institute of America, and I led all the health and sustainability initiatives for the food service industry. I worked with all the bad guys, McDonald's, Taco Bell, you name it, right? Like big food from a restaurant and food service perspective. And it's where I really got this deeper understanding of, very much like Mark said, often there's this sense that the common trope is we're just giving people what they want. We put this stuff out there because it's what sells. And so there's this crazy dance of consumers saying, why are you putting this absolutely toxic garbage, all the pieces that Mark's mentioned, when what I want, the consumer, what I want is healthy, nourishing food that meets all these other values. And then it's that piece I mentioned of it just often doesn't actually sell in the ways that companies who are willing to offer the better options see. So that's why there is also tremendous power in that market, in the demand generation, in putting your money where your mouth is, in the sense of allocating dollars that show this is the food I want. Like, I always talk about, for example, if tubs of oats started flying off shelves, we would have more oat farmers. If you had, similarly for lentils, or you name like your favorite example of just a really nutritious, sustainable food, and it sends the market signal, but it also then affects the other piece of the question, which was around agriculture. And so what I think about, there's absolutely a merit to the comment around how much power is influenced, especially in US contexts, on things like the Farm Bill from big food and ag. But also fundamentally, farmers are trying to feed their own families. They're trying to ensure that their land goes on for generations and so forth. And so similarly, it's when the market incentives are aligned for, say, ecosystem services, carbon markets, the kinds of things where we say, farmers, we are going to actually financially incentivize you to farm in ways that are best for human and environmental health. That's when that kind of piece of the puzzle can in turn come along. So my kind of takeaway points are, I guess, really just that individually, it's the part around not just your voice, but the power of market forces and influences in the broader collective, but that won't get us out of the issues that you mentioned around this very kind of exploitative situation. And that's where leadership really matters, not just you leading from where you are, but I am heartened when I see companies who have those CEOs, who have those people at the very top of the chain of command, thinking of something like Danone or Barilla. There's a handful of companies where this is not just greenwashing. This is actually really core to how they're operating. And it's you all to go become those CEOs, where it can make an even bigger difference, I think, by leveraging that scale of big, because big is not inherently bad. It's just that so far big has, I would say, exploited its size in bad ways.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And as Mark said, if you want to change something, go and sit with them. So this is the first message. And then, Mark, I think you should talk about food deserts.
Definitely. I'm going to talk about corporate for 2 seconds because.
But don't forget food deserts, please.
I promise I won't. I already responded that I promise I'll talk about it because it's really important because they're created by corporations. And so I have worked with almost every company in my career. And what I've come to learn is, and I think this is a really important lesson for all of us, when you get into a cage with a tiger, know it's a tiger. Don't expect it to sit on your lap. Don't expect it to change its ways in any way. I was in a perceived 5 to 20 year deal with a multinational company that told me everything I wanted to hear. They wooed me in their boardroom. They said all the words. They shook my hand. They took the pictures. They put the pictures all over the internet. And 5 weeks ago, they sent me an email because the contract hadn't gone through for next year that would train and feed 4,000 people, which we believed was already done. And that email said, our global KPIs no longer match up with the work that A Better Life Foundation is doing. We've made a decision. The tiger bit me. I knew it would because that's what tigers do. That's what they do. They meet KPIs. They don't serve people. That's what they do. So if you can go on the ride for a little while and it helps serve people, just know what you're doing, right? So when you are the next CEOs of things, know that there's humans that are the result of your KPI decisions that are disgusting a lot of the time. Food deserts. Food deserts is a terminology created generally by white people to feel comfortable about food apartheid. That is what a food desert really is. Food apartheid is where neighborhoods predominantly of BIPOC, brown, black, and indigenous people live that do not have access to the same ingredients, to the same things that the privileged people do. They are riddled with gas stations, liquor stores, and fast food options. Back to the obesity question, there's your answer. Poison, poison, poison. That's what's available. So there's incredible organizations doing the work. And I've been very lucky to mentor dozens of them over the 15 years that I've been working in urban agriculture, everywhere from the jungle in Compton all the way through here to the downtown east side of Vancouver, of people being employed who are formerly imprisoned, usually for charges like bench warrants around trespassing or marijuana possession or other trumped up things that also institutionalize black, brown, and indigenous people for profit. Then they're put back into neighborhoods where they don't have the things they need to succeed. Access to things that the privileged few, including myself, have. And this is normal. Like what I'm saying is not controversial. It's just fact. And it shouldn't, if you're feeling it, you're like, that's right, because it is. It's just correct. When you look at where these things occur, some of them occur in plain sight, in the middle of trucks driving by to bring fresh food to the privileged few. They drive right by them, wave at them. Sometimes they're driving the trucks. So we know how to change it. And there's some wonderful people in the work trying to help educate what you can do with an acre of land. With 1 acre of land, You can grow 50,000 pounds, no problem. 1 acre. With the way that we have farming practices now, that can also be an arid acre. I have a very lush acre, 11 lush acres, luckily, because I'm in the Great Bear Rainforest. And Marisol's cat is amazing. Don't apologize. It's amazing. And it's your cat, and we're humans. 11-acre farm just out this way. And we're in the Great Bear Rainforest. So I get rain 50% of the time. But it's also very cold. So I have hothouses. My grandfather had a greenhouse in his backyard on like 1/8 of an acre. And he grew all of his tomatoes and his herbs in it. Because he knew how, because he was a farmer. We didn't have vegetables at my grandparents' house that they didn't either can, preserve, make a jam out of, etc., that they grew on their 1/8 of an acre. They sustained themselves mainly on that. My grandmother still baked bread in a little ass oven. Like, they didn't spend money on groceries aside from buying certain things like refined flours, etc. In their proteins. They just didn't. They didn't need to. So this isn't about having money. It's about having access, and predominantly having access to education in a system that has been created to ensure that BIPOC people do not succeed. The system is there. It's in plain sight. And so until we start democratizing education in a real way, saying that everybody has a right to the same education and the same access, not bribing universities and not having wealth, but truly has access. And I think we might be doing some of that stuff here and in our work day to day. The options are there, but I think we do ourselves a disservice if we continue to use comfortable tropes and comfortable narratives to make all of us sleep better at night when people are sleeping in the streets. I hope that's helpful. That's why Sarah wanted me to talk about food deserts, maybe.
Thank you so much. We know that they have been designed, but we can now redesign and reshape them, I think. Thank you, thank you. And now I would love to ask to Claudia, why don't you ask your question? I know that there are some questions, Claudia, Segon, so I want you to jump in.
Thank you. I would like first to say to Sophie and Mark that you are very inspiring. And here we see service as happiness. So I can understand what you mean by service. And one of the questions that I have is related with education. And it's in terms of reshaping the HoReCa sector, in terms of making it more agile and reflective on climate and social justice. So in that sense, what characteristics of innovation should an educational tool should have in order to create change and impact on the HoReCa sector? What would you recommend, like with the experience you have?
I'll let Mark go ahead. Looks like you have you're jumping in the bit.
Will be nice to hear both of them.
Definitely, and I'll go quick, Sophie. I had the distinct honor and pleasure in redesigning the food system for the San Francisco Unified School District. So I got to work on the back end of IDEO, a massive organization that I got the pleasure of working with as well. I was a innovation fellow at the Stanford D School. So I got to be there for a year doing research and work, and got to work directly with the founder of that, David Kelly. And all of that aside, what I learned most was design thinking as a tool, and you can literally download a PDF from my website that will teach you how to do it in like 8 pages, is one of the most critical pieces of information that we can teach anybody. So as entrepreneurs, we lead with it. We understand it. We intuitively do things, right? But it's actually a skill set that huge consultancies from Deloitte to IDEO charge hundreds of millions of dollars a year out for, to teach people their insights, their key insights. And those are my friends. There's also friends of mine in corporations. They know I talk like this. It just is. That's my job. Learning how to do design thinking. Why Sara said, I'm a professor of innovation. I ended up teaching at Stanford, teaching rich white dudes in business how to come and like learn how to be more innovative. All I was teaching them to do is learn how to connect to their heart and empathy. Design thinking sounds very jargony, but it's not. It's about intense listening, empathy, understanding people's real problems and designing for those problems. In the SFUSD, in the San Francisco Unified School District, the problem wasn't that there wasn't food. The problem was nobody was eating it. And the main answer that we found was, I don't eat that. Like, what does that mean? It's like, I don't eat that. It wasn't culturally relevant to the people we were serving. So also where it was being purchased, and Sophie talked about this before, was from companies that make mass-produced food that make kids tired. It's injected with all sorts of shit. And so we changed where it came from to another company called Revolution Foods. It's a social enterprise that was creating the food that went into the system. I worked with a cafeteria worker, and I tell you this around education because I think it's really important. And I was showing her how to do plating, and we'd gotten some fresh herbs, and I slapped cilantro, and I said, smell this. And she started to cry. And I said, what's the matter? Like, do you not like cilantro? Because I don't really love it either. And she said, no, I've worked here for 30 years, and nobody's ever taught me anything about food. A cafeteria worker. So design thinking our way into what are the actual problems. People don't feel respected. They were spending $290,000 a year on a 2.5-week training every single year to teach people how to tie garbage bags that had worked there for 3 decades. These are the problems. We just keep throwing the same old stuff at people because we have other things we think we're worried about. In education in particular, there's no mystery here. You could ask a 5-year-old what they need in school, and they'd be like, I need a nap break and I need healthy food. Like, it's not hard to understand what you need to learn, but yet we do it all backwards. So I think design thinking is the centerpiece of how we figure out a lot of things. It's how I figure out everything. Otherwise, you're not testing your own assumptions or your own bias. And you have to test all of those things to design properly. No matter what you guys are doing, you have to test your assumptions. When I did work around homelessness, and I'll leave on this, I'm sorry, but I did over 100 ethnographic interviews. Ethnographic interviews, or ethnography, means sitting and listening, decentering yourself from the conversation, and just saying, resisting the urge to say, oh, I know how, oh, I had a cousin that. You don't do that. You just simply say, tell me more. And you listen, and you listen. And in those, I found out that people who were homeless on the peninsula in particular, which there's lots of, really wanted yoga. Now, my assumption, that probably would have not even been on my list of 100. But in my ethnography, it showed up 80% of the time. That's data. And regardless of what I think people want, I'm not them. So we have to know what people actually want.
I love that. And I have very little to add other than just to say how fun that both Mark and I are evangelists of design thinking, as you saw with my how might we question. So that is sort of a framework that's used to, again, start with not the answer, but with questions. And then the other piece I'll just build on is that the other term for design thinking is human-centered design. And I think that's what Mark has been really getting at all along, is that showing the human impacts, understanding from a Food for Climate League perspective, what we're saying is being perceived and with the organizations we're working with is being called sort of, groundbreaking, but it's really about what do humans need? It's pretty basic when you flip it on its head, but it's because of how much the humanity in a lot of this gets lost, right? It's so far removed, not just from humans, but as Mark has indicated too, food is so far connected from nature, from its original matter, and from the people, the hands that feed us, the people who prepare it, the farm workers who grow it and harvest it. I think that not only is human-centered design a useful tool, but human-centered design is a useful framework for just putting humans back into everything that a company is about, imagining a real person who, what I think I find really disturbing is sometimes, again, in these conversations of companies in their boardrooms or whatever it is, thinking about, they're designing the next slushy. Do they really think that a person, if you inserted human-centered design into that sort of intervention moment, you probably wouldn't surface that what people need is a new kind of blue slushy, right? That's probably not the outcome. And so it's really more of just a complete mindset shift that occurs when you start to use that tool. And so it's both the practical application of it, I think, and the ethos of caring, asking, understanding people's most fundamental human needs, and then designing for those.
Thank you. And here actually we kicked off the entire process talking about design thinking as the basic for prosperity thinking and the evolution of design thinking that now is seeing prosperity thinking as a kind of a next step. So now, Gian, I think that there are some people that wanted to ask questions.
Yes, we had Segon. Segon, would you like to contribute?
Hello, thank you very much, and thank you for
Hi,
both.
Segon.
Hi. I'm so privileged to be part of the Future Food cohort and to meet these brilliant people. And we're very enthusiastic way to instill whatever is being done in different parts of the world. I have two questions. One is, how can we leverage a database, a global database of recipes as a tool to democratize best practices into food? Like make sure that the illiterate person in the remote area in Ulaanbaatar is leveraging the knowledge that's being produced somewhere in east of Seattle. And another question is, to what extent do you expect the data usage, artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, to what extent can we use this in order to influence people's tastes and food habits? These are two questions. Whoever answers each, whichever, yeah, please.
I'll take the first one and maybe leave the second one for Mark, or you can, I mean, you're a chef, so you'll build on this too.
Sounds great. No, I'll take the last one.
Great. So I think that's a really interesting idea. I hadn't, I don't know of such a resource, a kind of global database of recipes. I think my only sort of caveat with that is that I've worked a lot in food literacy, right? Which is really just the revitalizing of regaining the confidence that's inherent. It is you know, as Mark said, we're born knowing how to cook, and food literacy has really just been lost because of how much outsourcing of meal making happens to companies and others over time, and all kinds of other things, like no longer having educational programs, at least in the US, that are actually in school. So this is as fundamental of a skill as reading, as you know, all the other subjects. So there's a lot happening, I think, on food literacy to teach people how to cook, and yet it is such a stopgap measure from my perspective until you have national or international sort of standardized. And what I mean by standardized is like part of sort of citizenship, part of just going through the school system, where food is central, where you are, where not just the knowledge or recipes, but actually the skills are taught, so that by the time you are an independent person out in the world, you feel confident in the kitchen. That's, to me, what's going to be needed to make such a recipe database really reach the end problem that you have in mind. Because what happens so often is that people, no amount of resources or recipes can counter the fact that people are scared, they're intimidated, they have no clue what to do with a knife, or how to prepare a meal, or again, if they can't access those ingredients, to Mark's point, or afford the ingredients or the equipment, right? All of these issues. So it's not to say we have to make it more complicated than it is, other than just to say that pairing actual tools and skill building will go a much further way in building self-efficacy, the belief that you can act on knowledge and tools that are given to someone. And so I think that we would need some of these to happen in concert to really have the effect that I think is your goal.
Thank you.
I'm going to answer yours, and then I'm going to also bookend, if it's okay with you, Sara, the question around food identity that's in
From
the chat.
Baltic, absolutely,
That
absolutely.
excites
Thank
me.
you.
So, first of all, keep your computers away from my food. Keep your computers away from my food. I have no interest in AI messing with my food. Now, I'm joking in part. I think that there is great use of technology in agriculture and the production of it. But unfortunately, what it does is it cuts out the humans who don't have a job or a living wage. So there was an organization that tried to come down here and do some AI work around urban ag. And they asked me to sit on their board, and I asked them to get out of the neighborhood. I said, there's about 3,800 unemployed people here who all would love to plant some stuff. So could you beat it? They tried to raise some money. They got rushed back to wherever they came from. So I don't subscribe to that. I think we're going to get to a point when we hit the sort of 12s, the 15 billions, where of course technology is going to have to come to play. But I believe truly, and you probably caught this out of my land acknowledgement, that the hereditary chiefs and chieftains of the lands from Warri, Lagos, and Port Harcourt in Nigeria through to the Coast Salish territories that I inhabit have the knowledge that we need to nourish ourselves, but we use food as entertainment. We've changed the food system to entertain us. As a guy who's made many mousses and pearls and all kinds of other crap that I don't like, are you entertained for $50 a plate? Are you getting enough sugar high out of this box to make you feel like it gives you the same high as this bottle of alcohol or this other thing that you do? We didn't do that. So if we are simply talking about nourishment and keeping our body moving in a really wonderful place, that's when you hear of these people who strip back into whether it be veganism or restriction diets. They're like, I've never had more energy. Like, yeah, because your body's not spending 90% of its time processing all of the shit you're putting in it. Right? We didn't eat that way. We just simply didn't. So there's a return. And I worry the computers will just try and figure out how to put more in us to make us consume more. Right? So that concerns me. But I do know that technology has its place, just not my kitchen. So as far as the discussion in and around cultural and the significance of contributing in a way there's two conversations, and we don't have time for the first one, but feel free to jump on the internet and watch chefs argue about cultural appropriation. It is super fun and super important to understand that, you know, a white guy in New York is doing a pho restaurant and he has adapted all of these recipes and is not paid homage, and has not tilted the hat and does not respect the community and does not do a thing. That's a problem. It's a real problem. I cook from where I know, and I also employ people who know how to lead in this way. So we cook predominantly for indigenous populations. My executive chef is Vanessa Watersworth, and she is of Coast Salish descent. She's full-blood Coast Salish and a super badass. And she runs my kitchen over at Save On Meats for a Better Life Foundation because she knows it's hers. Now, I know the ways. I can emulate pretty much any cuisine that you can throw in front of me, but I prefer to cook regional, as I have for Sara everywhere I go with her. If you put the ingredients in front of me locally, I want to learn about it. I want to cook around it, but I will always cook my style with those ingredients. I don't try and emulate people's culture because it's theirs. So I think those things are really, really important. And to identify it and decolonize, which I hope is what we were trying to discuss here, menus, textbooks, everything. I got in a huge fight. I was in Thailand representing sustainable brands, and I did a talk, and they gave me a white coat to wear to a chef battle with a Michelin star chef. And I said, I'm afraid I don't wear that coat. And they said, why not? And I said, because it makes my black friends uncomfortable. And they said, why? And I was like, why do you think? And we had this huge discussion. It was like, but it's an institution and it's pride. And I had people of color who are chef friends of mine too, who were like, I wear this jacket with pride. I'm like, it hurts other people's feelings and you don't have to wear it. What if you just decided not to be a better person? And so I think all of these conversations are really important. I had to wear my chef white to my dinner at the Vatican, and I have a medal from Canada and things that I have to wear. I didn't feel like myself. I got off and I took it off. I was in a black t-shirt. This is how I cook. And it's more representative of me. So I think all of the things that we do, we have to be mindful. It's not about what we think the societal normative value is. It's how it impacts the lowest common denominator of people to access. If it hurts somebody's feelings, stop doing it if you can. I don't think that's complex, right? If somebody says to you, this is appropriation, take a look at it instead of getting defensive, right? And we just immediately go to the defense that, no, I am not a racist, or no, I am not a misogynist, or no, I'm not, part of the system. Chances are you've been all of those things at some point. I have, right? Unbeknownst to us. I don't think we do it because we're bad. I think we do it because the systems push us in that direction. So if we're going to change the way that we work and all the things that we do, we have to talk. We have to walk our talk, rather. Rant over, sir. Thank you for lining that one up.
Thank you so much. And decolonization of menus is going to be for sure something that is going to be quoted and quoted in the next weeks ahead, I think. Good. So Maria Sole, I don't know if we keep the last question.
Okay, what a responsibility.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, because you mentioned you had concert, Mark, you had concerts and people were just driven there because of the artists they loved. So I was wondering how much of an impact can actually other forms of communication have in conveying the message here, and how much are they actually having already? If you could discuss about that.
Huge. I would love to. And I'd love to invite you all this Sunday at noon Pacific Standard Time. If you go to my social media anywhere, I'll just have a link there. It's on Twitch. If anybody uses Twitch, great. If you don't use Twitch, you can just go through your web browser. And DJ Z Trip will be headlining. We have a very special musical guest and 6 other incredible DJs who are playing. We do this thing once a month called Streams for Dreams. Same way, but through Twitch, because the audio is incredible, right? So it's an actual audio setup versus somebody on IG Live trying to DJ and getting cut off by the algorithm. Stupid. Twitch is amazing. And so we do this monthly concert last month with Jazzy Jeff. Before that, it was Just Blaze, who produces for Jay-Z. We bring all this in, and then I got everybody there listening to music. We're having the best time. There's dance parties, there's Zoom rooms. You can see people dancing. And then I hit you with facts. I come in, I'm like, hey, remember me? 80% of North America is living in desperate poverty. People are like, what? And now Just Blaze. Musicians all care about this, the ones that I work with all care about it because generally they've come from it. Musicians come from the struggle. They know it. They get it. They want to show up. So again, it's just a resource pool. I work very, very closely with DJ Jazzy Jeff, and I mentor a lot of young DJs and singers and rappers and producers. And that community, I was like, we're stuck inside. Isolation is the single biggest cause of addiction and instability. Everybody is isolated. Our mental health is at an all-time low. Can you help me bring some love to the world? And they're like, absolutely. Twitch partnered with us. And so we usually get between 40 and 60,000 people uniquely come through to each of these parties and hang out. And they all have to listen to me talk about food security. So it's always a good tool.
That's great. So time is running, and I think we have to say goodbye. But guys, I invite you all, first of all, to our final celebration this weekend because the teams within the bootcamps are working and there's a hackathon going on. So if you want to jump on our celebrations during the weekend, we're going to for sure come and say hi at your party. But for sure, if you also want to jump at our one, you are more than welcome. Thank you all, because it's always such an inspiring moment that we're sharing together, but it's every words were sounding in our heads, and we're going to keep working and trying to transform your words in something tangible. And also follow Food for Climate League, follow Sophie Egan on all different social medias. There's an incredible book on how to become a conscious eater that I suggest you to check. And also follow Mark Brand. Follow his Twitter account, his Instagram account, and Mark and Sophie are both part of the journey. Finally, this summer, Sophie, you should come to Polycat, our boot camp, because Mark was there last summer, and we want also you and the Food for Climate League gang join us, as well as, of course, we're going to keep you all posted in the next sessions ahead. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys. Please share your question. If you have more questions, we can definitely connect you and keep going answering also in the next days ahead. And for the ones that I'm not going to meet before Christmas, all my best greetings to you and your loved ones. Let's try to stay connected as much as we can and share meals, take care of others. Food is care and food is love. So I think that the beautiful climate supper last weekend, jumping in all of your kitchen, has been showing the power of food. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And a big hug to your community, Mark. Every time I see you, it's like seeing all the faces of the people that sometimes you introduce us to. So hug all of them.
Thank you all.
Oh, thank you all.